Hello everyone and welcome to the show. It's Monday the 25th of May. This is episode 73 of the Meet the Farmers podcast and I'm your host Ben Eagle. I hope you're having a really good bank holiday weekend. It's a packed show today, so let's take a look at what's coming up. Alongside the farming headlines, Emily Norton from Savills will be on the show to update us regarding the agriculture bill. And then in Farmer Focus, we'll be leaving the land for once and talking about what it's like to farm in the North Sea. I'll be speaking to Wave Crookes from Seagrown about farming seaweed. So without further ado, let's take a look at the news stories from the past week. So we'll take a look at the headlines in a bit, but firstly, we're going to take a brief look at the agriculture bill, which of course passed through the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago. To do this, I am joined by Emily Norton, who is Head of Rural Research at Savills. Emily, how are you doing?
Really well. Yeah, really well. Nice to join you, Ben.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. Briefly, can you tell us what happened when the bill went through the Commons? And particularly, let's focus on the amendments as to why those key amendments didn't pass.
So a lot of the debate on the day focused in particularly on one amendment, which was the new Clause 2 proposed by Neil Parish and supported by a huge range of people. The NFU, the CLA, the TFA, every farming acronym out there were supporting this particular amendment. And what it sought to do was to align international imports into this country with domestic standards in order to ensure that UK farmers were not effectively undercut by global trade deals. Now, it was a really live question. I mean, this was going on at the same time as Liz Truss was out there talking with the US about a new trade deal. Clearly, all the questions with Brexit and the new trade deal with the European Union. So, the overall context of this clause was really politically important, plus the fact that it had wide-scale cross-party support in the debate. Now, the critical thing is that the amendment did not pass. So despite the fact that it had all of this support and people thought it was a really good idea, it didn't pass. Now, there were a variety of reasons for that. Some people advocating on Twitter, it was just really badly drafted. I read a great Twitter thread from a trade lawyer who just picked it apart, said it was too vague, we would be fighting on whatever these different words mean. Other people objected to the fact that it would make it harder to conclude trade deals, and even the deal that we desperately need with the European Union. Having that new Clause 2 in place would make our trade negotiators' life really difficult. So in my opinion, it was right that it didn't pass. But what we're left with now is a situation where we are basically only got political goodwill and that cross-party support to rely on in terms of protecting UK farming standards.
Of course, we're now passing into the Lords. I mean, how likely is it, do you think, that we'll see any changes at this stage?
I think it's highly unlikely. The clause itself is, almost undoubtedly in breach of World Trade Organization rules. It was poorly drafted, and it's going to make life very difficult. But also, in my mind, sort of thinking about trade as a threat, in my mind, regardless of what sort of the farming lobbies and the way that they've approached this, thinking about trade as a threat in my mind is really the wrong way to be thinking about these things. What we've got is this situation where food has always been imported into the United Kingdom since the foundation of the Commonwealth. There's some great books on food history and the United Kingdom's relationship with food. The fact that the Thames is a navigable river meant that we could bring in supplies globally to feed our ambitious country. And so sort of having this idea that somehow UK farmers should be insulated from global trade in food seems particularly, I suppose, foolish. It just doesn't take into account the history and the reality of the history of our country. So what should the argument be? I think that's the better question. What should the argument be that we're making in relation to trade deals and to trade negotiations? In my mind, it absolutely has to be opportunistic. We've got to be looking for the opportunities to export really high value, high quality United Kingdom produce around the world and make sure we protect the existing export markets that our producers depend on. But secondly, what my Nuffield travels in particular showed me was that if you have a very free trading environment, but you don't protect domestic agriculture, you just get wide-scale land abandonment. I was in Hong Kong in the 1980s. They liberalized their trading borders to support their financial services sector and had something like 86% land abandonment. That's not the environmental outcome that our government is talking about. Our government is talking about very high environmental ambitions for the quality of our environment in this country. Now, if they want that to happen, they need to invest in it. So in my opinion, having a free trade environment is simply the opportunity to price the value of environmental investment, because we're not going to get that money from supply chains. Who else is going to be investing in environmental outcome? It creates, in my mind, a legitimate argument for public investment in environmental outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of practical implications of all this, when do we think we're actually going to see change on the ground as a result of this bill?
So in theory, and I suppose this is the slightly terrifying thing for most people, nobody is talking about the agriculture bill being delayed. We're still facing a transition period where from next year, 2021, the basic payment scheme starts to go, and the environmental land management scheme, which is in theory the environmental payments that will follow it, won't come, on a wide scale basis till 2024. So again, in terms of what we're focusing on, all the attention, all the policy attention has been on ELMS and how the environmental land management scheme is going to work. But what government is really doing with the agriculture bill is signalling, and George Eustice has been quite open about this as well, farming needs to stand on its own 2 feet. Now, that's all very well and very easy to say, but there's whole sections in the agriculture bill that people aren't really talking about to do with supply chain regulation and fairness in agricultural supply chains. So out of all of the things I think could possibly benefit that we really need to focus on right now is, how are those supply chain regulations going to work? How can we make sure that farming receives a fair share of reward from agricultural supply chains, that respects the amount of money that needs to be invested in environmental outcomes, that protects water quality, air quality, animal welfare, all of those things that we know are really important. The thing is, if supply chains were legitimately allowed to go and source from third countries that are not producing to the same standards, I can understand then why that would not be fair. But if those supply chains are regulated cleverly in a way that protects environmental protection globally, then I think we're in a much more coherent place in terms of supply chain returns and environmental protection.
Well, Emily, I would love to talk about this subject for the entirety of the programme, but unfortunately that's all we've got time for. But thanks so much for coming on the show and giving us your thoughts. Emily Norton there. Now, on to some of the headlines from the past week. The AHDB has released import and export figures from the sheep sector. Exports of sheep meat fell by 40% in March compared to the same period last year, with values falling by 21%. Sheep meat imports rose by 16% in volume and 34% in value. France is traditionally the UK's largest export destination, and exports here are down significantly, as well as to Germany, Belgium and Ireland. Most of the increased volume of imports of sheep meat is from New Zealand and Australia. Despite an overwhelming response to DEFRA's Pick for Britain campaign, there is still a huge demand for pickers for harvest this year. According to the NFU, there are still 25,000 to 40,000 workers to find. In Europe, the European Commission presented its latest food and farming plans on Wednesday last week as part of its new European Green Deal policy, which sets out to transform the EU's food system. This includes a target of 25% of EU farmland to be organic by 2030. The Commission also wants to reduce the use of synthetic fertilisers by 20% and cut pesticide use generally by 50% in that same time. Critics have said that the strategy is moving too quickly and that food prices will rise as a result. A popular and long-standing agricultural college campus in Cumbria could close next year due to financial losses. Askin Bryan College's Newton Rigg campus has been earmarked for closure in July 2021 after an independent review found that it was not financially sustainable to keep it running. Newton Rigg itself has been running at a deficit of around £1 million. A 45-day consultation on the closure began last Friday. And that is the news for now.
In the news.
It's now time for Farmer Focus, and today we're talking seaweed farming off the Yorkshire coast with Seagrown's Wave Crookes. To catch the full-length interview, search for Meet the Farmers podcast on YouTube. It's Farmer Focus. On Farmer Focus today, we're talking seaweed, which I know is a bit of a new one for the podcast. I'm really pleased to be heading up to Yorkshire again, and I've got the guy with probably the coolest name ever, Wave Crookes, on the line, who is Operations Director of Seagrown, which is based at Scarborough. It was established in 2018. Seagrown is England's first large-scale commercial seaweed farm. Wave, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for coming on the show. How are you doing in these strange times?
Good morning, Ben. Thanks for having me on. Strange times indeed. But the seaweed world, it's unstoppable, really. It's going on, and we are managing to make some progress with what we're doing with our project. Coronavirus is obviously a big concern, and it's slowed things down, but nevertheless, we are pressing on, and we're making some good steps forward.
Yeah, I mean, I was really looking forward to coming up and actually seeing your operation, because it sounds absolutely fascinating. But as I'm not there, and for the benefit of listeners, can you just describe what a seaweed farm actually looks like? Because in essence, you're farming 25 hectares of the North Sea.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a farm is quite an appropriate term for it. So in effect, we've got an aquatic field, really. We've got 25 hectares of water and seabed. We've got this area under licence from the Crown Estate and the Marine Management Organisation. And in effect, we've got the rights to be able to farm seaweed in that area. It's buoyed off. On the surface, all you will see is a series of buoys. If you look on the navigational charts, the electronic and the paper charts for vessels of all types up to big ships, the seaweed farm will soon be included on there. But we have to go through the UK Hydrographic Office and get all the charts in the world amended to reflect that it's there. But on the surface, all you would see is a series of multicoloured buoys, some of which have lights on, some of which don't. On the seabed, we have an anchoring system, a mooring system, and all the rope work and jiggery-pokery in between to grow the seaweed.
Yeah. We'll go back into your background in a bit later, because in many ways I think you've got the perfect background for this. But why and when did you get that moment where you thought, right, this is the thing I want to be doing now? I'm going to start this seaweed farm.
Well, I was working at the time. I've been at sea for quite a long time, and I was working at the time for British Antarctic Survey on a polar research vessel called the James Clark Ross, the Royal Research Ship James Clark Ross. And we were down in Antarctica, and a bunch of scientists turned up to start a scientific expedition down there, as was the norm. Anyway, that's where I met Laura, who is a marine scientist.
Yeah.
We got talking down in Antarctica about a business that we could start that would pool our collective expertise. I can do marine operations on the surface and subsea. And Laura is a very eminent scientist, and she knows a lot about the science of the oceans. So it seemed that seaweed farming was a logical way to combine those two skill sets into what is now Seagrown.
What can you do with seaweed, and what are you doing with it at the moment in terms of products and end uses?
There are two sources for seaweed. You can either wild harvest the existing stock from the rocks and reefs. We actually do have a license from Natural England and various landowners, local authority, etc., to do so. So we started up the business using that wild harvested seaweed to produce food and bath products, and we're currently selling a range of seaweed seasonings, which is a good way of getting seaweed into your diet and adding some really top flavour and nutrition to your food. It's good for your skin, so we are also producing a range of bath products, and we plan to expand this range once we get chance post coronavirus. But food is only the tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of what you can use seaweed for. As I said, we're using wild harvested seaweed at the moment on a fairly artisanal level to produce these food products. But once we start taking the farmed crops from the seaweed farm offshore, we'll be able to access some quite exciting industrial sectors, and I think that they're really quite interesting. So there's lots and lots of industrial uses for seaweed. I'll give you a brief list, but there are many, many of these. Biochemicals is a good one. Alginates, carrageenans, other sort of platform chemicals which can be used to create other compounds. They're present in seaweed, and they can be extracted through biorefining and used in a variety of industrial ways, a huge variety. Nutraceuticals are very popular products at the moment. Everybody's interested in health and fitness. And there are a variety of supplements that which use compounds extracted from seaweed for health reasons. Ditto pharmaceuticals. Over in China, they have drugs that we've never heard of. Pharmaceuticals we've never heard of here. A lot of those were extracted from seaweed. They're really big in seaweed over there. Cosmetics, everybody's heard of seaweed skincare, and I think every cosmetic manufacturer uses seaweed and seaweed extracts in a lot of their products. Very good for your skin. Bioplastics is an interesting one. In that we not us personally, we can produce the seaweed, but there are companies that make plastic that can use the seaweed as a feedstock, extract the right chemicals from it, and use those chemicals to make biodegradable plastic.
Amazing.
Which is really quite a nice circular process, I think, because it comes from the sea, and when it ends up back in the sea again, it disappears.
We've covered, I think, most sectors, I like to think, on the podcast, but definitely this is one that I know absolutely nothing about. Internationally, who are the big players? You mentioned China there, but where's the history of seaweed farming, and where's the real investment going at the moment?
Well, certainly, I think Asia primarily they're huge producers of seaweed, both wild harvested and farmed. And in fact, if you, I took a look on Google Earth, and if you zoom into the coast of China on your satellite and around Japan and Korea, you can see their seaweed farms from space. They are so big. They're so big they have to allow lanes for commercial ships to pass through. Otherwise, you have all sorts of carnage with ships driving straight through the middle of seaweed farms. But they're huge. They are big. They're very, very labour intensive, and their method of farming won't work in northwestern Europe because it would be too expensive. So we need to be slightly smarter here, and we need to mechanise and use smart process to optimise what we can produce. In northwestern Europe, Scandinavia, Spain, Portugal, they're farming seaweed. In fact, Scandinavia, particularly Norway, are bringing it in quite a big way to mitigate the effects of their offshore salmon farming. Seaweed benefits the environment, and it's the sort of foil to the problems that salmon farming can cause. In the UK, not so much. We really haven't got on board with this yet. And in fact, whilst there are some other seaweed farming operations in a fairly embryonic state around the UK, they're almost exclusively in inshore sheltered waters, such as perhaps a creek in Cornwall, or a sea loch in Scotland, or perhaps somewhere in West Wales or Ireland. On our coast here in Yorkshire, we don't have that luxury, so we're forced offshore. We've got to go straight into the open water, straight into the deeper water of the North Sea. So I think that we're in that sector of the industry, we've found a niche there, and Seagrown actually are, I think, the only offshore seaweed farming company in the UK at the moment. But I can see that changing, and it really should change, because it's possible to do, and with a bit of application, we can make it work.
Yeah, I was going to say,
sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, what, if anything, do you think is holding the industry back at the moment?
Well, it's certainly, I can only speak for the offshore aspect of this. It's very capital intensive. You need to have capable vessels with deck machinery, cranes, winches, that sort of thing, or at least have access to those, and they're expensive. They need crew that are qualified and proficient. You need to have the expertise to be able to make this work. So you need a marine background and a science background to draw from. All operations at sea are licensed, and you need to get a marine license. So depending on where you are in the UK, it's difficult anywhere, but to a greater and lesser degree, it's more difficult in certain areas. So, for instance, if there's a lot of competition for water space, such as perhaps the south coast springs to mind, the south coast of England, with heavy commercial traffic up and down the channel, fishing activity, recreational activity, where are you actually going to put your seaweed farm offshore? So you've got to work well with the other water users and coordinate in order to get your license granted. And that's a long, and it can be an expensive and quite
I can imagine.
quite a process. Once it's done, but you've got to site your farm correctly. And as I said, the capital expenditure early on for a new company is huge. And frankly, the banks don't really like lending for projects such as aquaculture, irrespective of the benefits it can provide. They don't like the perceived risk. Okay. So you need to find a way of financing that, as well as providing the expertise and the people to make it work once you've got the kit.
I mean, you mentioned the number of permissions, etc., that you require for this. I mean, what impact does it have on the wider environment?
Well, a positive one is the headline. That the attraction, or one of the attractions of doing this, is that we actually will positively benefit the environment. We're not taking away anything that we haven't already put there. In effect, we're using the sea as a garden. We're not taking away naturally occurring resource. We're growing things from seed that we've created. So when it grows, seaweed, it's really good at absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is, of course, very topical at the moment, and it's bang on message for what we need to be doing for this carbon neutral by 2050 narrative. It absorbs more carbon dioxide than woodland would ashore. So as a complement to planting trees on shore, which take up land resources that we can use for other things, offshore seaweed farming is really a good way of drawing down carbon dioxide. So while it's growing, it's absorbing the CO2 from the atmosphere, holding it inside itself. The difficult bit will then be keeping it in there, of course, but there are ways of doing that. It's also releasing oxygen into the water, the surrounding seawater, and oxygen levels will increase in a bubble effect around the seaweed farm. This is beneficial, of course, to all the other marine life, the fish and the shellfish. Everything up on the surface will enjoy being up in among the seaweed. We're hoping that, we actually do think that the seaweed will be colonised by things that small fish will like to eat. Big fish eat small fish, etc. And eventually we'll have an ecosystem within the canopy, if you like, of the seaweed, which is just below the surface of the sea. Yeah. Down on the bottom, where the anchor system is, we'll also have a sort of haven for benthic life that lives on and just under the seabed, because it's not a closed area as such, but the activity on the seabed will be only us, and we're going to use a very, very environmentally friendly system of anchoring the seabed, anchoring the system to the seabed, which doesn't use any chain. So there'll be no thrashing around in storm conditions of chain, which kills things on the seabed. And we'll have no chain in our system, and we'll be able to provide an artificial habitat for things down there as well. So we're hoping that it's going to become kind of a fish aggregator or a marine life aggregator, because it'll be a safe area with good conditions for growing shellfish and also for other marine life.
Yeah. Absolutely amazing. I mean, we were talking about money earlier, and the fact this is very capital intensive to start with. You received a grant from the Coastal Communities Fund of £472,000 and some smaller grants as well. Why did you apply for the money in the first place, and what have you used it for?
Well, we are essentially creating a new coastal industry here. That industry needs skills that have traditionally been traditional skills that have been lost. With the changing pattern of the fishing industry, it's become less labour intensive, and a lot of people have been displaced out of that industry. And I can tell you that in Scarborough, we've got lots and lots of seafarers that live in Scarborough, but they can't find work here, and they have to disappear off all over the world to find work. Yeah. So what we're doing here is offering an alternative, a local alternative, a non-fishing alternative for people with traditional maritime skills, as well as further downstream in the production and the support and the admin and the transport and all the other functions that come with a growing industry. We'll be offering those posts out to the local community, and that is what the Coastal Communities Fund were really interested in. They're interested in redeveloping deprived coastal areas where there's not much employment, and we were able to offer that, so they were interested in our project. Especially with the traditional maritime skills and also some new technical posts that we can offer for laboratory staff and hatchery technicians, that sort of thing, which wouldn't normally be available in a place like Scarborough. So yeah, we used it for capital purchase and to start and grow a small team, and that's what we've currently got now. And yeah, we wouldn't have been able to do this through any other means because of the situation with the banks and the risk adversity, really.
Yeah. And I mean, as an ex-fisherman, that side of actually bringing the potential for bringing back employment in the same sort of area just must be fantastic for you personally.
Yeah, it is. It's a very satisfying part of the job. If we can, every maritime post that we can create is an opportunity for somebody who's been displaced. And I remember, I mean, I'm 45. I'm not that old, I don't think. But I remember in the recent past when Scarborough Harbour was full of whitefish trawlers and a mixture of vessels. And now it's exclusively, or almost exclusively, shellfish, because the whitefish has gone north, it's disappeared, and the fishing patterns have changed. Who knows what's next if the shellfish starts to move? We don't know. So anything we can do to diversify that and create those posts for people that have got usable maritime skills, then yeah, I'm all ears. It's a good thing. And Seagrown is managing to achieve that.
Let's talk about your background a bit. Tell me about your childhood and life growing up, and any influences you might have had on that in terms of your general passion and interest for the sea, really, and the marine world.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a theme throughout my life, and my two younger brothers also. All three of us have been at sea, either on or under it, all of our lives, really, in various capacities. I first went to sea when I was around, I think, 7 or 8 years old, on the family trawler, and so did my other two younger brothers. So we spent our childhoods literally every school holiday, and actually sometime out of the school holidays, which we should probably have done, on the fishing vessels in the North Sea, out of Scarborough. First of all, fairly close to Scarborough, but then as things changed, we had to go further and further up and run it up until sort of 10-day trips to the northern North Sea. Then we all three of us, went to sea in various guises. My middle brother is still a trawler skipper now. My youngest brother is a master mariner and a marine consultant. And I've worked in all sorts of different jobs in the military and deep sea diving offshore and for the British Antarctic Survey as a mariner all my life. So the influence from the fishing industry from an early age obviously carried forward through mine and my two brothers' lives. And I'm glad it did. It's been a really good life, and it's set us up to do what we're doing now.
How long were you fishing for?
I did work for a couple of years before joining the Navy, around sort of A-levels sort of time.
Okay.
The Navy made me do A-levels, actually. I would have liked to have joined at 16, but they said, no,
okay.
Get your A-levels, and then you can go to the Naval College at Dartmouth and join as an officer. So I did that, and I'm pleased I did. It was good advice. But throughout that period, I was fishing, and then up until the time when they gave me my start date in the Navy.
Yeah. And then you went straight into the Navy, and you trained as a diver straight away, or?
Well, a warfare officer first and foremost. You've got to learn to drive the ships first before they let you play with things like helicopters and diving sets and all the rest of it. But yes, I did. I became a military frogman in the Navy, and had a great time too. It was great. 11 years of that, and working all over the world in all sorts of crazy jobs.
There's a huge amount that you've got going on at the moment, and obviously there's the corona situation, which is perhaps holding things back in some ways. But what are your aspirations for the next couple of years?
We need to get the offshore farm fully spun up. That's the process from start to finish, from hatching out the minute larvae shellfish and tiny seaweed plants in our own hatchery, growing them up to the point where we can make them strong enough to take offshore, and then successfully transfer them offshore, and coming up with a reliable process and repeatable process to produce sustainable shellfish and seaweed. The market will need to be developed. I think the oysters and the scallops will pretty much sell themselves, but the seaweed, the industrial sectors that use seaweed are not used to having a UK bulk source of the commodity. So we need to link the supply with the demand, and that's going to take some time. And also, most importantly, to build up our team in Seagrown to allow us to do all that. So we've got a lot on, but we're not phased. We've got some good people and the right equipment and the right knowledge, and there's no reason why we can't make it work.
Well, Wave, I know you're a busy man and you've got lots going on, but no, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been honestly absolutely fascinating just hearing about this because it's completely new on me, and I think it's going to be completely new for a lot of our listeners. So,
You're very welcome, Ben. No problem.
Yeah, and best of luck for moving forward.
I'll
be excited to see where it goes.
Well, watch this space.
Cheers.
Thank you, mate. Bye.
It's Farmer Focus.
Wave Crookes from Seagrown in Yorkshire. A reminder that if you want to hear the full interview for that, search for Meet the Farmers podcast on YouTube, and there's loads of other interviews there from previous episodes as well. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but thank you very much for listening, and thanks also to the show supporters, the Mercer Family Charitable Foundation. Please do tell others about the podcast, and if you haven't already done so, click that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening so that you never miss another episode. Next time, I'll be speaking to two East Anglian entrepreneurs about how COVID has impacted on their businesses. But for now, have a great week, and I'll see you next time.